What's more painful than betrayal? Sometimes it's being erased. A husband standing under bright lights chasing admiration and opportunity, while quietly denying the woman who has stood beside him. Not divorced, not separated, just temporarily invisible, because acknowledging her would make him look smaller in front of someone else. Not every betrayal begins with an affair. Sometimes it begins the moment someone believes the person at home will never leave. As they say, never make someone a priority when you are only an option. When a spouse treats a marriage like something that can be switched off for convenience, is the answer to fight for recognition, or to walk away before becoming a footnote in someone else's ambition. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see where our stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next twist in this journey. Now, let's listen to her from the heart. My name is Azariah Vale Monroe. I'm 32 years old, and for a living, I look for weaknesses before systems collapse. I work in network security for a fintech fund in Phoenix. My days are built around patterned small anomalies that don't look dangerous until you connect them. A login at an unusual hour. A data request that doesn't fit. A shift so subtle most people would miss it. I used to believe marriage worked the same way. That night, I was standing in our bathroom in Scottsdale watching my husband adjust his tie in the mirror. Dominic Hale Monroe, investor, charismatic, the kind of man who could hold a room without raising his voice. We'd been married for 2 years together for 4. No scandals, no screaming matches, no public implosions. We had a solid mortgage history, clean tax returns, shared dinner parties, and a circle of friends in the Scottsdale startup scene who described us as power couple adjacent. There were no obvious red flags, but there were patterns. Over the past few months, Dominic's wardrobe had shifted. Sharper cuts, jackets I'd never seen before, shoes that looked less like comfort and more like strategy. He started attending more networking events in Paradise Valley, private investor mixers, founder showcases, curated guest lists. He stopped asking if I wanted to come. When he spoke to partners on the phone, he used to say, "We just bought a place," or "My wife works in security." Lately, it had become "my place," and I'm based out of Scottsdale. Singular, detached. Once walking past his office door, I heard someone ask about his marital status. I didn't catch the whole exchange. Just one word, complicated. It wasn't an accident, it was a shift. That Friday night, he stood in front of the mirror, smoothing his tie like he was about to step on stage. At the party tonight, he said casually, not looking at me, "Act like you're not with me." For a second, everything inside me went quiet. Not loud, not explosive, just still. I didn't ask him to repeat it. I knew exactly what he meant. Not give me space, not let's keep things low-key, not it's a work event, erase yourself. I met his eyes in the mirror. "Okay," I said. He blinked, almost startled by how easy that had been. "It'll just be easier," he added. "Some conversations are complicated." I didn't ask easier for who. I didn't ask what kind of conversations required the absence of a wife. I logged the data. 20 minutes later, I was driving him toward a sprawling villa in Paradise Valley, the kind with manicured palms and warm lights spilling from oversized glass doors. Music pulsed faintly through the night air. Luxury cars lined the driveway. He checked his reflection in the passenger side mirror before stepping out. "Thanks for the ride," he said. "Not see you inside? Not come in later. Just thanks." He closed the door and walked toward the entrance without turning around. I stayed in the driver's seat. The music carried through the desert air. Laughter rose and fell. He disappeared behind polished wood doors like he was stepping into a different life. I realized something in that moment. He wasn't embarrassed of me. He was recalibrating his image, and I was excess weight. I drove home. The house felt different when I walked in, not empty, but temporary. Like a furnished rental I'd been living in under someone else's name. I stood in the center of the living room looking at the couch we picked together, the framed wedding photo above the console table, the wine glasses still drying by the sink. For the first time, I didn't see a home. I saw infrastructure. I walked into the bedroom and opened the closet. The suitcase was on the top shelf. I pulled the suitcase down without rushing. There's a difference between disappearing and extracting. Disappearing is emotional, dramatic, reactive. Extraction is controlled. I laid the suitcase open on the bed and packed the way I build security protocols, deliberate and in sequence. Laptop first, external hard drives, encrypted USB backups, then personal documents, passport, birth certificate, our marriage license. I took copies of our joint financial agreements, investment summaries, and tax records from the fireproof drawer. From my jewelry box, I removed the pieces I brought into the marriage, my grandmother's bracelet, the diamond studs my mother gave me when I turned 30. I did not touch the wedding photo. I did not remove the couch cushions. I was not erasing myself from the house. I was extracting my assets from a system that had just revealed itself as unstable. Before zipping the suitcase, I logged into our joint bank account, and that's when I saw it. 3 weeks earlier, Dominic had transferred a significant amount of money into an investment fund I didn't recognize. It wasn't small, it wasn't routine, it wasn't discussed. My pulse didn't spike. I took screenshots. Saved transaction IDs, copied the routing details. Another pattern. I closed the laptop and walked into the kitchen. I tore a sheet from a notebook and wrote, "You wanted me to act like we weren't together. Now you don't have to pretend." I placed the note beside the coffee machine exactly where he stood every morning. By 11:47 p.m., I was driving toward a hotel near Phoenix Sky Harbor. I checked in under my own name. No drama, no scene. I turned my phone off. 6 hours later, I turned it back on. It vibrated almost immediately. Dozens of missed calls, messages stacked in red notifications. Dominic. The first ones were sharp. "Where are you?" "What is this?" "This isn't funny, Azariah." Then defensive. "You're overreacting." "It wasn't like that." Then pleading. "Please, just call me." I didn't open them. Instead, a new message came through. "Lena Torres, are you home?" I stared at her name for a moment before responding. "Why?" Her reply came fast. "Because Dominic just told a room full of investors he's basically single." My stomach didn't drop. It settled. Lena kept typing. "He said your marriage is in transition. When someone asked directly if he had a wife, he said, 'It's complicated.' A few people pushed back. 'They were at your wedding.' I pictured the room, the tension. Then Lena added Sloane Carrington was there. He's been trying to connect with her. She looked confused. When she realized he was actually married, she left the room. Sloane, a founder raising Series B capital, wealthy, strategic, exactly the kind of connection Dominic would call transformational. Lena's final message took longer to arrive. He implied you've been holding him back, that you don't really understand his ambition. There it was, not just erasure, rebranding. I looked at the wall across from the hotel bed. Beige, neutral, stable. My phone kept lighting up with his name. Calls shifted from anger to panic, then to silence. I placed the phone face down on the nightstand. I didn't need clarification. I didn't need apology. The clarity had come hours earlier in the bathroom when he'd asked me to remove myself from his image. Everything after that was just confirmation, and once you see the pattern, you don't argue with it. You respond. I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating against the cheap wood of the hotel nightstand. For a second, I didn't remember where I was. The ceiling was unfamiliar. The air smelled like industrial detergent instead of Dominic's cologne and coffee. Then it came back, Paradise Valley, the driveway. Lights, the word complicated hanging in the air like a confession. I reached for my phone. 32 missed calls, 47 messages. I didn't open a single one. I didn't need to read the words to understand the tone. The timestamps told the story. Anger first, then urgency, then panic. The frequency increased between 100 and 300 a.m., slowed slightly, then surged again just before dawn. That wasn't regret. That was loss of control. Another call came in while I was staring at the screen. Julian Brooks. I answered. Are you somewhere safe? He asked immediately. Yes. There was a pause on his end, the kind that carries information before words arrive. He showed up at my place around 6, Julian said. Pounding on the door. Said you misunderstood everything. Wanted to know if I knew where you were. I closed my eyes. What did you tell him that I didn't? A beat. He's telling people you stormed out because you got jealous, that you've been insecure for months, that you finally snapped. I almost smiled at that. Jealous. It was efficient, clean, familiar. A story people understood without needing details. He said you've been controlling, Julian continued carefully, checking his phone, not supporting his ambition. There it was again, a pattern forming in real time. I thanked Julian and ended the call. Dominic wasn't just reacting, he was building a framework. If I stayed silent, he could define the silence. I sat up in the hotel bed and opened my laptop. The money transfer I'd seen the night before was still there, waiting in the transaction history like a fingerprint. I called an attorney I'd met years earlier through a compliance audit, Rachel Levine. She specialized in marital asset division and financial transparency disputes. I'd never thought I would need her number. She picked up on the second ring. I need to understand my exposure, I told her. Within 2 hours, I was sitting in her downtown Phoenix office sunlight, cutting across the glass conference table. I laid out everything, the transfer, the investment fund. I didn't recognize the absence of a prenuptial agreement. Rachel listened without interrupting. Without a prenup, she said, folding her hands, any investment made during the marriage could be considered community property. If he's moving money without disclosure, that's not just a marital issue. That's legal risk. I slid my laptop toward her. She scanned the transaction details. This fund, she said slowly, is tied to a holding company that's recently partnered with Carrington AI. My stomach didn't drop. It tightened. Sloan Carrington, I said. Rachel looked at me. Yes, Carrington AI. The same Sloan who had left the room when she realized Dominic was married. He didn't just flirt, I said quietly. He positioned. Rachel nodded once. It looks like he anticipated a deeper association. In other words, the party wasn't spontaneous ambition. It was strategic. I left her office with a folder of information and a recommendation document, everything. Do not confront without representation. Protect assets, first. Emotions, second. By the time I got back to the hotel, my phone had lit up again. This time the messages weren't just from Dominic. Mutual friends. Hey, just checking in. Are you okay? I heard something weird last night. I didn't clarify, but the volume of concern told me something else was happening. The story Dominic was telling wasn't landing as cleanly as he hoped. That afternoon, I toured an apartment in Tempe. 1 bedroom, hardwood floors, large window facing west, too quiet, too empty. Perfect. I'll take it, I told the leasing agent. I signed the paperwork within 48 hours. When I transferred the deposit from my personal account, I felt something settle inside me. Not grief, not anger. Alignment. That sentence in the bathroom hadn't been a temporary request. It had been a revelation. He had shown me exactly how he saw me. Something that could be switched off when necessary. The first night in the Tempe apartment, I slept on an air mattress. The room echoed when I moved. Boxes lined the walls unopened. My suitcase sat by the closet like it was waiting for instructions. It didn't feel like a stopover. It felt like infrastructure under construction. I drove into Phoenix Monday morning and walked into the office like nothing had shifted. Same security badge, same glass doors, same quiet hum of servers behind reinforced panels. Systems don't collapse because of noise. They collapse because of concealed faults. Julian called that afternoon. He's still talking, he said. About what version, I asked. The one where you got jealous over nothing. He says you went through his phone, that you couldn't handle his networking, that you made him choose between marriage and growth. I leaned back in my chair. And which did he choose, I asked. Julian didn't laugh. He's framing it like you forced the decision. Of course he was. A man leaving for ambition is admired. A man pushed out by a jealous wife is absolved. That evening, someone from the Scottsdale startup circle sent me a screenshot. Dominic had posted a vague message. Some chapters close when you finally choose freedom. Growth sometimes requires walking away from what holds you back. No names, no details. But the timing was precise. He wasn't defending himself. He was shaping perception. I studied the language carefully. No accusation, no admission, just suggestion. That was the kind of manipulation that worked because it allowed other people to fill in the blanks. I forwarded the screenshot to Rachel. Public positioning, she texted back. Keep documenting. 2 days later, Rachel called. There's more, she said. The investment transfer I'd flagged had not been fully disclosed in prior joint financial summaries. The amount was significant enough to raise questions about intent. If he's reallocating marital funds into a vehicle connected to someone he's courting professionally, Rachel said that complicates things. Complicates. The same word he'd used. Later that week, my phone rang again. Elena, Dominic's younger sister. I'm not calling to defend him, she said immediately. I didn't speak. He's telling our parents you left because you couldn't handle the pressure of his career, she continued. But this isn't the first time he's rewritten a story. There was no bitterness in her voice, just fatigue. He did this before she said. Different woman, different narrative, same pattern. He adjusts facts until he looks reasonable. Do they believe him? I asked. There was a long pause. They're starting to notice inconsistencies. Something inside me shifted. Dominic's image had always been polished, controlled, resilient. Now there were fractures. I didn't correct anyone publicly. I didn't post. I didn't counter. Silence, when intentional, is not weakness. It is containment. By the end of the week, the conflict had expanded beyond a marriage. It was about reputation, about financial transparency, about who controlled the version of events that survived. I assembled my bed that Saturday morning. Real frame, real mattress, no air pump. As I tightened the final bolt, I understood something clearly. This was no longer about whether he wanted me at a party. It was about whether I allowed myself to remain in a story where my presence was negotiable. And I didn't. I started running before the sun came up. Tempe at 6 a.m. feels unfinished. The air is cool in a way Arizona only allows for a few brief hours. The streets are quiet except for sprinklers and the occasional dog walker. I would lace my shoes in the dim light of my new bedroom step outside and let my body move before my thoughts had a chance to organize themselves. At first, I ran because I couldn't sleep. Then I ran because I didn't need to check my phone anymore. That was the real shift. For weeks before the party, I had measured mornings by whether Dominic had texted me first. After I left, I stopped reaching for the screen to see if his name was there. I stopped waiting for explanations. I stopped wondering what tone his messages carried. The absence of anticipation was cleaner than closure. By the time I came back from my runs, sweat cooling against my skin, the apartment felt less temporary. I would stand in the kitchen with a glass of water and look around at the half-unpacked boxes and feel something unfamiliar stability that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. Julian called one morning as I was stretching on the living room floor. He's in trouble, he said, without preamble. Financially, I asked. Yes. The Scottsdale house had always been expensive. We could afford it together. Dominic alone could not. He tried to tell the landlord you were coming back, Julian said, that it was just a misunderstanding. The landlord asked for confirmation, something in writing. There was none. Julian exhaled. He's late on rent. I pictured Dominic standing in that house, still trying to project control, still believing the situation could be reversed if he framed it correctly. He thought you'd cool off, Julian added. He didn't think you'd actually move out. That part didn't surprise me. To Dominic, I had always been consistent, predictable, reliable, a constant in the background of his ambitions. Later that week, I learned he had started borrowing money, from his parents first, then from a friend who had once invested alongside him. It wasn't large amounts at a time. It didn't need to be. The pattern itself was the signal. In the Scottsdale startup circle, whispers had begun. The party in Paradise Valley had not faded quietly. Too many people had been present when he implied he was essentially single. Too many had known otherwise. A few investors had asked subtle questions. Had there been a separation? Was there a divorce filing? Why the inconsistency trust in that world was currency, and Dominic's had taken a hit. Lena texted me one evening. She blocked him. I knew immediately who she meant, Sloane Carrington. After the party, Dominic had apparently reached out multiple times. He'd tried to clarify. He'd said the situation had been misinterpreted. He'd insisted things were already ending at home. Sloane hadn't responded. Her assistant eventually sent a brief message telling him not to contact her again. The opportunity he'd angled for was gone. A few days later, Rachel called me with more details about the investment transfer. The fund he moved money into, she said, is directly connected to a holding group aligned with Carrington AI. I closed my eyes. So the timing wasn't random. No, she said. It looks like positioning. Positioning. That word again. He hadn't simply wanted to appear unattached socially. He had needed to appear unattached financially, strategically. If a partnership deepened, if Sloane's company expanded, if investment discussions turned personal, the image of a stable, supportive wife might complicate the narrative he was selling. He hadn't just been flirting. He had been preparing to restructure his life in a way that optimized opportunity. And I had been a variable to manage. The more I understood, the less emotional I felt. By the end of that month, I replaced the air mattress with a real bed. I assembled the frame myself. It took longer than expected. The screws didn't line up easily. I had to adjust and realign more than once. When I finally placed the mattress on top and pressed my palm against it, it felt symbolic in a way I hadn't anticipated. This was not a pause. It was not temporary space until reconciliation. It was a decision made permanent by action. While I built something solid in Tempe, Dominic's foundation in Scottsdale was thinning. He was losing more than money. He was losing control of how the story unfolded. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. No return address, just my name written in handwriting I knew instantly. I held it in my hands for a long moment before setting it down on the kitchen counter. I didn't open it. Not because I was afraid, because I no longer felt urgency. For days it stayed there. I moved it once to the desk, then into a drawer, then back onto the counter. Each time I saw it, I registered the absence of compulsion. Julian called that weekend. He's been going around trying to explain himself, he said. Meeting with people. Reframing the party. How's that going, I asked. There was a pause. Not great. Too many people were there. The stories don't line up. Dominic had told some that he and I were already separated. Others that we had been struggling privately for months. A few that I had left suddenly over jealousy. Inconsistency spreads faster than scandal. In investment circles, reliability is everything. If a person can't keep his personal narrative straight, people start wondering what else might be unstable. His mother texted me again. This isn't how adults handle marriage. You should at least speak to him. I didn't respond. Elena called later that evening. He's thinking about moving back to Chandler, she said quietly. He can't keep up with the house, and things aren't going well. Define not well, I said. He's frustrated, defensive, says everyone is overreacting. I understood that tone. Dominic had always believed outcomes could be corrected with enough explanation. He still thought this was about misunderstanding. That night, I finally opened the envelope. The letter was 2 pages. Neat, controlled. Azariah. I don't know how to start this without sounding defensive, so I won't try to justify anything. I made selfish decisions. I convinced myself they didn't matter because nothing physical had happened yet. That was dishonest. He wrote that he had felt invisible in certain rooms, that being around Sloane and other founders made him feel chosen, valued. I paused at that word. Chosen. He admitted he had chased that feeling, that he had believed presenting himself as unattached would simplify opportunities. that he had underestimated how much it would hurt me. He did not ask me to come back. He did not beg. Instead, he wrote that maybe things could have been different if we had understood each other better, if he had felt supported in ways he couldn't articulate. The letter was careful, self-aware enough to appear accountable, still centered on his experience. I read it twice. Then I folded it and placed it back in the envelope. I understood something clearly. If I responded, I would step back into his structure of explanation. I would re-enter the space where he adjusted details until the story felt tolerable. If I stayed silent, the narrative stopped evolving. He would have to sit with it as it was. The tension reached a point that felt almost physical, not between us, but within the situation itself. Dominic had lost more than a wife. He had lost credibility in rooms that required precision. He had lost an investment pathway he believed would elevate him. He had lost the house he assumed would always anchor him. Most of all, he had lost the ability to dictate how I appeared in his story. I stood in my Tempe apartment that night, looking out at the quiet street below. In the span of weeks, the conflict had grown beyond marriage. It had touched reputation, opportunity, finances, family, and control. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. He had tried to turn me into something optional. Instead, I removed myself entirely, and in doing so, I kept the only thing that mattered, my choice. The email from Rachel came in at 7:12 a.m., just as I was tying my running shoes. We need to file. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't urgent in tone. It was precise. Dominic had attempted another transfer from the same investment vehicle linked to the Carrington Holding Group. The amount wasn't catastrophic, but the timing was telling. It suggested movement, reallocation, preparation. If he continues shifting funds, Rachel had written, "We risk erosion of marital assets. Filing now protects your position." I sat on the edge of my bed for a long moment, reading the message twice. For weeks, I had been reacting to information. This would be the first deliberate move. By noon, I was seated across from Rachel in Maricopa County, signing the petition for dissolution of marriage. The pen didn't shake in my hand. There was no swelling music in my head, no cinematic realization, just clarity. When I handed the documents back, I felt the weight of something shift from uncertain to defined. Dominic would be formally notified within days. That same afternoon, Rachel called again. "He attempted another withdrawal this morning," she said, "from the same fund. It's now documented as a transaction under review." "Does that help us?" I asked. "It strengthens your position," she replied, "especially given the timing." The timing. He was still operating as though he could move pieces before the board was locked. He didn't yet understand that the board had changed. 2 days later, Dominic texted me. "We need to talk. In person." It was the first direct message I'd received from him that wasn't layered in panic or accusation. I responded once, at my attorney's office. He agreed. When I walked into the conference room, he was already seated at the far end of the table. He looked thinner. The confidence he used to carry so effortlessly seemed dulled like a suit that no longer fit the occasion. His jaw was tight. His eyes moved quickly, scanning the room as if searching for leverage. For the first time since the party we were facing each other. "I didn't think you'd actually leave," he said before anyone else spoke. I let the silence sit. "I thought you were upset," he continued. "I thought we'd talk it through." Rachel remained still beside me. "You asked me to disappear," I said evenly. "You just didn't expect me to do it permanently." He ran a hand through his hair. "I just wanted a chance," he said. "An opportunity. That's all. I wasn't trying to end the marriage." I studied him carefully. "You wanted to look unattached," I said. "You wanted rooms to see you as available." "That's not what I meant," he said quickly. "It is," I replied. And that was the moment it ended. His frustration surfaced then. "You're making this bigger than it was," he said. "It was one event." Rachel slid a folder across the table. "This is not about one event," she said calmly. Inside were printouts of the financial transfers, transaction records, dates, amounts, the holding group's connection to Carrington AI. Dominic's expression shifted. He hadn't expected this level of documentation. "You moved marital funds without disclosure," Rachel continued, "and you attempted an additional transfer the day the petition was prepared." Dominic looked at me, then back at the papers. "It was an investment," he said. "It was positioning," I replied. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. For the first time since this began, he had no immediate revision, no reframe, no alternative explanation ready. He wasn't used to being cornered by facts. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," he said, finally softer now. I know I answered. That seemed to confuse him more than anger would have. "I'm not here to destroy you," I continued. "I'm here to separate cleanly, transparently." Rachel outlined the terms clearly. Full financial disclosure, asset division based on documented transfers, no verbal side agreements, no informal arrangements. Dominic listened. "You really won't reconsider?" he asked. There it was. The last opening he believed still existed. "I don't hate you," I said, "but I won't return to a place where my presence is negotiable." He looked down at the table. The meeting ended without raised voices, without theatrics, without reconciliation. I stood before he did. "I hope you figure out what you're looking for," I said. Then I walked out. I didn't look back. For the first time, he understood something irreversible had happened. He had lost more than narrative control. He had lost access, and access had always been his quiet assumption. Dominic moved back to Chandler 3 weeks later. Elena told me over the phone, her voice carrying equal parts relief and exhaustion. "He needed to reset," she said carefully. In the Scottsdale investor circles, his presence became sporadic. He stopped appearing at high-profile networking events. When he did attend smaller gatherings, conversations shifted subtly when he approached. Trust once questioned does not repair quickly. Then Sloan announced her Series B funding round. $42 million, public release, media coverage, clean investor list. Dominic's name was nowhere on it. No advisory position, no strategic partnership, no mention. He had stepped into that Paradise Valley villa believing he was positioning himself for elevation. Instead, he had disqualified himself from the room. The divorce proceedings moved steadily. Financial disclosures were exchanged. The previously transferred funds were accounted for in the asset division. Rachel negotiated firmly without aggression. I did not demand more than what was mine, but I did not concede. By the time the final settlement was signed, everything had been documented clearly. There would be no lingering ambiguity, no unresolved financial threads to pull later. Elena sent me one final message. "He's reflecting. I think he finally sees it." I didn't ask what he saw. Reflection is not restitution. I never responded to Dominic again, not after the meeting, not after the settlement, not after the papers were finalized. Some endings don't require dialogue. They require distance. On a quiet Saturday morning, I ran through Tempe as the sun climbed over the horizon. The air was cool, steady, my breath even. I thought about the bathroom in Scottsdale, the mirror, the tie, the sentence that had sounded small but carried so much weight. Act like you're not with me. For a long time, I believed betrayal would feel explosive. It didn't. It felt clarifying. What ended my marriage was not an affair. It was a request to shrink. Now my apartment was fully furnished. A real couch facing the window, a bookshelf holding more than shared history, plants by the sliding glass door, the bed frame steady beneath clean sheets. It no longer echoed. It belonged to me. I didn't hate Dominic. I didn't regret loving him. But I understood him clearly. He had wanted options. He had believed I would always be the one that waited. He was wrong. That night in Paradise Valley, he asked me to act like I wasn't with him. I did, and I never went back. Some endings don't come with fireworks. They arrive quietly in a sentence that reveals more than an argument ever could. And maybe that's what stays with us tonight. Not the scandal, not the money, not the pride. Just the moment someone asked to be seen without us. In that pause, we see something about dignity, about how small compromises can slowly erase a person if we let them. We all want to be chosen, but we also learn that being chosen should never require disappearing. There's no villain here, no scoreboard. Just two people standing at different truths. And sometimes the kindest thing we can do for them and for ourselves is to step back without hatred. If this story spoke to you, if it reminded you of something you've lived through or are still carrying, feel free to leave a few lines below. Your words might be the comfort someone else needs. And if you'd like to keep listening to stories like this, stories that sit with us a little longer, subscribe and stay with us. Thank you for spending this time together. Wherever you're listening from, take care. And we'll meet again soon.